Hey there, folks. So, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're finally going to be talking about a new album from Kesha called Rainbow. Man, it's nice to be talking about the music for once with Kesha, isn't it? Hell, it's nice that we actually have new music this time, right? Indeed, there was a part of me that deep down was convinced this album was never going to get released, that the horrendous legal nightmare and label drama would prevent us from ever getting a third record from Kesha. Reminder here that Lipsha was shelved, and a lot of pop stars and pop artists have had their entire careers put to the side. But now that Rainbow has actually finally been released, I think there's some house cleaning that's in order here, especially surrounding how so many people would love to say they've been on Kesha's side since the very beginning, and that they've always loved her work, that Animal was underappreciated for its time, and that Cannibal was even better, that Warrior never got the chance it truly deserved. And it's at this point where I have to drop the hard stop on some music critic historical revisionism going on, because while the mainstream public might not have been paying close attention beyond the singles, I sure as hell was. Well, it's because of my own kind of complicated relationship with a lot of Kesha's music and albums. Because I'll be the first to admit, I didn't really like the singles from Animal back in 2010. And I found Kesha's entire persona kind of obnoxious, kind of grating, kind of emblematic of all the problems of the club boom. And it wasn't until a year later that I went into that album and Cannibal more in depth. And while I will say that both are more uneven than you probably remember, there were hints of satirical depth, lyrical nuance, and genuine pipes that for some reason Kesha's handlers didn't think the mainstream public wanted to hear. They're actually halfway decent projects. Now that takes us to Warrior in 2012, a record with a notoriously troubled production and was arguably crippled right out of the gate thanks to sloppy promotion, horrible single choices, and some really bad timing. Watch the special comments, I have touched on this sort of thing in detail before. But it's also the sign that Kesha was bucking actively against her producers and label more than ever. And the fact that Warrior still wound up as one of my favorite albums of 2012, that's a testament to its craftsmanship and personality. But the public and the majority of critics, they didn't see that, instead focusing on the one-dimensional party girl recycling songs and treading water who need a horrible guest verse from will.i.am to seem relevant in 2013. Oh god. And to see a lot of folks now retroactively getting on board with Kesha given the legal ordeal and desire to be seen as the right side of music history without knowing the artistic variety and depths and incredible live show that were in plain sight for Kesha all along if they had bothered to look and listen, just reeked to some cheap revisionist cynicism, especially when it seemed like, again, the music was getting pushed out of the picture instead of labeling Kesha as a victim of the music industry. But again, the album Rainbow is finally here. We can talk about the music. If I'm going to be very honest, I was optimistic but kind of cautious about this album. I was all for Kesha taking a greater lead and writing in the production, pushing her sound into even weirder or rougher territory, leaning on rock or folk or country, but I was worried that the redemptive comeback story would overwhelm the weirder elements in composition and songwriting that I've always found to be two of Kesha's best weapons. But then again, if anybody has earned the right to make this sort of record focus on that redemptive comeback arc, it really is Kesha, and she's a smart enough songwriter to challenge conventions and our expectations. So, okay, at the end of the day, what do we find at the end of Rainbow? Well, honestly, I get the feeling this is the album that Kesha kinda had to make at this point of her career, addressing both her comeback to the spotlight, showcase her talent that the mainstream public might not know in the same way if they've only heard the singles, and placate label bosses that need to be convinced that Kesha can work with more distinct producers and that her sound actually has some legs in the mainstream. And thus, by necessity, this record is gonna feel a little bit transitional, especially given that it's been 5 years since Warrior, and pop has changed a lot since then, arguably for the worse. And most of the issues I have with this album, they do fall in that transitional lane. But that said, this is a great pop album. Sure, it's a little rough around the edges, and I don't think overall it's quite as cohesive or punchy as Warrior was. But again, I'm pretty forgiving of all that because of so many lines that Kesha had to toe to make this album at all. And the fact that it turned out as great as it is, that's a testament to her as an artist. So okay, let's start off with Kesha herself. And goddammit, it's so refreshing to have Kesha back as a presence in mainstream pop. Most mainstream pop is so obsessed with stiff, monochromatic sounds, percussion over melody, too much reverb, and all these trap snares and hi-hats and taking themselves way too seriously, that Kesha's loose exuberance and boundless charisma is incredibly refreshing. What's more, none of it feels forced. This record is going to get a lot of comparisons to Lady Gaga's Joanne, but while Lady Gaga is an impressive singer and presence in her own right, no hate there, Kesha's looser, more organic style doesn't succumb to the stiffer theatricality that undercut a lot of the rock and country leanings on Joanne. Of course, there are points where Kesha can get a little bit too sloppy sloppy. I'm not crazy about how the second verse of Woman just kind of falls apart into giggling, but much of that is redeemed by the fact that Kesha actually sounds like she enjoys making fun pop music, and her natural expressiveness makes a lot of these songs with already strong melodic hooks really quite infectious. But of course, the big conversation has sparked up, it's been around the composition and production. Because while it does make sense as a progression from Warrior, at least if you've heard the entire album, it is a very different tone than what many people will expect coming from just knowing her singles. For one, the auto-tune is cranked back considerably, and you can tell it was always a stylistic choice. She never needed auto-tune, but unfortunately, that also means the vocal production isn't always consistent from song to song, especially on the tracks of Eagles of Death Metal guest starring, where she can sound a bit tinny, especially opposite their deeper baritone. Now look, some of this was inevitable. There's a lot of producers brought in here, from pop staples like Ricky Reed and Drew Pearson to Ryan Lewis, most known for working with Macklemore, and even Ben Folds of all people. Seriously. And the fact that Kesha is blazing through genres did mean that there was naturally going to be a lot of different sounds adjacent to each other, but I do wish that as a whole, the record landed on a more consistent, rougher edge a little more. And that's mostly because this record makes it abundantly clear that Kesha is at her best in rock, freak folk, and indie country, where it flatters her irreverent attitude the most. Unfortunately, at least for this project, she does have to split the difference on more pop-leaning songs, which leaves cuts like the synth swells of Him to feel a little flat for me. But again, not all the rest of the experimentation works either, let's be fair. I've already talked about my issues with Woman on Billboard Breakdown, but I can't say I entirely love the acoustic Finding You all that much either, both because the very prominent bass groove and sharper drums feel more developed than the main guitar line, and the hook doesn't quite pay off some of the build-up. And while I love the textures and the multi-tracking on the psychedelic country of Spaceship, the song does kind of run a tad long, and Kesha has ended records with stronger and weirder stuff. I remember Past Lives. And again, this isn't saying that Kesha can't do pop music well. Learn to Let Go has only grown on me with more listens since Billboard Breakdown. Praying was always a standout song, and the cleaner tones of Rainbow, courtesy of Ben Folds on the piano, they're pretty beautiful. And the transition from acoustic folk to pop bombast on Bastards really stuck the landing well. But I'll be honest, the songs that I love the most on this project are those going straight for other genres. From the buzzy, charging riff that anchors Let 'Em Talk with a phenomenal hook, the bratty noise of Boogie Feet, to the ridiculous but kind of adorable acoustic freak folk ballad Godzilla, to a set of 3 country songs that are among some of Kesha's best. Now, of course, you're going to get a pretty great cover in collaboration with Dolly Parton on Old Flames Can't Hold a Candle to You. I knew from Deconstructed that Kesha would just knock this out of the park, and her interplay with Dolly sounds phenomenal. But then you get Boots with this phenomenal galloping groove, the whip cracks, and the darker guitar line, or Hunt You Down, that might as well sound like a cut that Angelina Presley would have dropped this year with the smokier tones, or something that Brandy Clark would have put out on her last album that I really loved. And as I've said a number of times before, Kesha seems to understand a country sound and heritage better than the vast majority of guys that are gunning for success on mainstream country radio. Call that ironic. But again, where I was most concerned going into this album was the lyrics and a lot of the songwriting, and yet for the most part, my fears were put to rest. Again, Kesha's writing style is a bit of an acquired taste. Her casual profanity, the gender-twisted insults, the quirky details, the balance between coy crassness and real sincerity, it gives her the sort of personality that so many modern pop starlets would kill for. But again, it is a distinctive voice in her writing that I actually happen to really like. And while the recovery and redemptive arc does take up a considerable portion of the album, it doesn't dominate the project, and Kesha shows many sides of it and shows some variety. From the straightforward self-esteem anthem territory of Bastards and the title track that actually have a little bit more meat and desperation to them, to the kiss-off of Let 'Em Talk, to the more pointed recovery and reconciliation that comes on Praying or Learn to Let Go. And yet beyond that, Kesha writes some pretty fascinating love songs, between the borderline possessive stalker vibe on Hunt You Down that she's really way too good at, to the exasperated naked sexuality of the hookup on Boots that I really liked, to Godzilla, which is a surprisingly tender song about falling in love with the titular character. Yeah, it's probably a metaphor, I kind of wish it wasn't. And yeah, it's totally ridiculous, but at the same time, between the little details and Kesha's delivery, it feels kind of sweet to me, to the point where I wish songs like Finding You had a bit more of that same sort of distinct detail. Similar case for Woman, but even then you got the flip side where the detail is specific to the point of kind of being a little bit weird, like with the Pepsi reference on Boogie Feet, or some of the callouts on Him. And yes, I like that Kesha's anthems are full of the sort of relatable details to her fans and following instead of blatant luxury porn. She references a Hyundai instead of a Beamer, but at the same time, I've heard Kesha make plenty of songs in the vein of Him before, and this is not her strength. strongest. Then we got Spaceships, and yeah, I'm forgiving of a lot of psychedelic writing, but the exit via outer space is a transcendence moment that doesn't really fit in with the arc of the album. It's not a bad song, but again, she's made better closing tracks. But as a whole, if you can't tell by now, I was really rooting for this album. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. For Kesha's diehard animals, this will be the natural evolution that will definitely satisfy and that we all saw coming. But I can see this album convincing those put off by the seemingly one-dimensional bratty party girl that came through on her big singles, along with a bunch of critics who are just looking for the right excuse to not call her a guilty pleasure anymore. In terms of chart success, I think this is about the best thing that Kesha could have possibly released while naturally expanding her sound. And while I'm not sure how many singles this will generate beyond Praying, it will certainly move enough album units to ensure some creative flexibility going forward. At least I hope so. Probably keep Kemosabe afloat. And for me, again, I'm not quite sure it's better than Warrior in my books. That record had some of her best ever earworms and handled the genre blending a bit better, but Rainbow is still pretty terrific. Solid 8 out of 10 for me, easy recommendation. Kesha, welcome back to the party. I can't tell you how much pop has missed your presence. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I know part of the big thing here, I got a haircut. Not entirely pleased with it either. It's a little bit shorter than I would otherwise like, but whatever, moving on. Beyond that, if you guys want to buy the record, and I highly recommend you do, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there, so I want you guys to tell me what you thought about this. Whether or not you think it's the best part of Natural Evolution, whether you think it's better than Warrior, or whether or not you don't quite think it got there as I did. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and for the higher tiers, once a week, you guys get to add records or even movies to that schedule. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.